The religious love to claim that they can prove God, but in practice, they never ever can. Why? Because they're only trying to prove God to people who already believe in God, not to anyone who doesn't take their silly preconceptions seriously. They're just ignorant, which is hardly a surprise. But at least we have to give them a chance to make fools of themselves, right? Because that's really all they do. So let's do exactly that coming up next. This time, we get to hear directly from God, or at least that's the name of the channel. It's a pretty decently sized channel, but this particular video, it's not doing well. It's called How to Easily, and yes, that word is in all caps, How to Easily Prove God to an Atheist. And its downvotes outnumber its upvotes by at least 2 to 1, at least as I'm writing this. I don't think we're going to be very impressed here, do you? So let's check in and see, because maybe we'll come out the other side as Christians. I don't know. I wouldn't hold my breath on it, but hey, anything's possible, right?
Believing in the existence of God is a complex matter for humans.
Not really. All you need is a lot of ignorance, a fair bit of gullibility, and people telling nonsensical stories that provide emotionally comforting narratives to other people who really want to believe. It's when any of those things evaporate that religion goes away. I'm not so worried about the complexity part. I care only about the truth. If there actually is a God of any kind, I want to know about it. If I am not convinced that any gods of any kind are actually real, I am not going to believe. It's that simple. I'm not resistant to the idea. I just care if it's actually defensible, rationally, logically, and evidentially. And so far, at least, it simply isn't. Maybe this video is going to change my mind, because it's called How to Easily, in all caps, Prove God to an Atheist. And the all caps never impresses anybody, I'll tell you right now. So, okay, I'm game. Go right ahead.
It's a question that crosses everyone's minds at least once in their lifetime. While some, like atheists, assert that there is no God.
No, we don't. If you can't even get that right, then you're already off on the wrong foot. We do not necessarily assert that there are no gods. We are simply not convinced that there are. There is a difference that the religious by and large refuse to acknowledge. Why? Because mostly they're too busy preaching to the choir, and it's a lot easier for them to just cast atheism as their polar opposite, instead of recognizing that atheists are just people who honestly don't believe because they have no evidence to convince them that any of it is true. They'd have to be honest to admit that, and I think we know better than that, don't we?
It raises the question, do they possess concrete evidence supporting the absence of God?
No, and we don't claim to. This is why they invent the straw man, to push their own evidential responsibilities off onto others. This is where the dishonesty comes in. If they were going to be honest, and we know they're not, they'd realize that they have their own burden of proof regardless of what anybody else has. They are claiming a God is real after all. That carries a burden of proof that they are incapable of meeting. It doesn't matter what any individual atheist may or may not say. That doesn't diminish their own responsibilities, and they are desperately trying to run around with the goalposts to get away from it. So why don't you try for a little bit of honesty here? Because that would be a novel change of pace.
Can they claim they know everything about the universe and arrive at such a conclusion after comprehending its entirety? This seems like a blow to their egos, and if atheists are honest with themselves, they may recognize this flaw and transition to agnosticism.
That is not what that word means. However, it doesn't actually matter. I'm also an agnostic. I don't claim to know whether gods exist or not, because I don't have any evidence to support the non-existence of things, because non-existent things don't tend to leave any evidence behind. Yet I am still an atheist in that I don't believe in any gods, because I have not been convinced that any gods actually exist. Convince me and I'll stop being an atheist. Don't, and I won't. It's that simple. Because the simple fact remains that agnostics still don't believe in any of these gods, which of course makes them atheists. I think it's just a less threatening word for the religious, like they're on the fence about it and they just might be convinced, whereas atheism sounds mean or something. It just proves how ignorant the religious actually are. And that's not exactly a surprise, is it?
A stance of uncertainty about the existence of God, counteracting an atheist's logic, may seem challenging, but it's not impossible. In today's video, I'll share straightforward methods to prove that God does exist.
And I bet that he won't. Here's a problem that the religious tend to have, at least in my opinion. Feel free to disagree down in the comments if you'd like, but I have seen this time and time again. They present arguments that would sound perfectly fine to an existing theist, but are just bullshit to everybody else. If you don't start with the preconceived notion that the religious have, then they're not going to convince you at all. They will not convince anybody with a brain that any of the things the religious say are true. Of course, the religious aren't looking for anyone with a brain. People with brains who care about rational reality, those people don't tend to convert, do they? Which is why they don't want to talk to us. They're perfectly happy to talk about us, or at least their straw man version of us, where they just get to make stuff up and invent nonsensical boogeymen, but they don't want to have an actual back and forth rational conversation with us. It reveals the utter bankruptcy of their position. But then again, what else is new?
You've likely encountered someone who, when you shared your faith, mentioned not believing in God, and chances are that you found it difficult to prove to them that God indeed did exist.
Because sharing your faith doesn't prove anything to anyone. Theistic story time isn't impressive to people who don't already believe. We don't want to hear your testimony. We don't want to hear how what you believe makes you feel. We want to see your evidence for your God, such that we can take that evidence, evaluate it rationally for ourselves, and see if we come to the same conclusion intellectually that you did. Of course, it doesn't work that way because the religious never have any intelligent conclusions. They just really want to believe. They are looking for entirely different things than we are. We want truth, things that are justified in the real world, backed up by objective evidence that anyone can study without having to believe in it first. They just want a comforting fantasy. And so long as that remains the case, where there's a divide that large between the two sides, we are never going to be convinced. And that's their problem, not ours.
In the early 2000s, new atheism gained popularity, driven by figures like Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens.
There is no new atheism. That's not a thing. Anyone who says new atheism, you know that person is a moron. The only difference between new atheism and old atheism is that the religious can't shut us up anymore. That's the part that really bothers them. They've lost the social power to shout us down and ruin our lives if we make them look bad. And let's be honest, in reality, the only ones making them look bad are them, because they have stupid, unjustifiable beliefs. The only reason they call us new atheists is because they think we're mean now that we're not controllable. And that's not true. We've always called them out on things. We just have a voice that they can't silence anymore. So please stop embarrassing yourselves in public. You're just making yourself look dumb. Get to your evidence already, because all the buildup is just boring.
Though two have passed, their influence persists through agnostic scholar Bart Ehrman, and a new wave of outspoken TikTok influencers. What's notable in the last 5
Wait a minute. Asked 5 years? Do you not even watch your own videos for quality control? And I see this a ton these days. I've pointed it out many times before. People who are putting up so many videos as fast as they can that they're not even doing their own due diligence to make sure that their videos are any good. And that's not just a religious problem. There's one channel I saw a while back where almost every single video they put out had multiple takes that he just left in. He screws up, he starts over, he doesn't go back and edit out the mistakes. It's just the same thing over and over and over and over. On rare occasion, I can see that you can make a mistake, but he does it again and again and again, and it never gets any better. I just don't watch that channel anymore because the quality control is so utterly lacking. You have to be at least somewhat professional about this. At least try.
years is the surge of atheistic ideas on social media. Christianity has lost its appeal, and there's a trend of deconstructing from what's considered toxic Christian doctrines.
We've looked at deconstruction before, and I'm kind of blah on the whole thing. If you mean checking out your existing beliefs to see if they hold up in demonstrable reality, great. That's exactly what I did. I cared about the truth, and I got rid of all the things in my life that didn't stand up to critical scrutiny. However, I do see a lot of people who are just going on pure feelings. Do I like it? Who cares? It's one thing to say, do I like chocolate ice cream? Do I like the styling of this car? That's fine to consult your feelings in a case like that. When you're asking, is this thing true, or is there evidence for this thing, your feelings don't mean a damn thing. It shouldn't matter at all if you like Christianity or not. You should care if Christianity is actually true. And of course that goes for all the other religions as well. And far too many people out there simply don't. It's just pathetic.
These stories of deconstruction, which initially emerged in colleges, have now become widespread, even reaching middle schools. More and more people, millions worldwide, believe that when you die, that's the end.
Because it is. That's what every shred of evidence that we have at hand shows. It doesn't matter what you wish was true, it matters only what is actually true. And we have no reason whatsoever to think that you continue on after your brain dies. In fact, I just had this exact same conversation with a theist who insisted that there just had to be an afterlife. Well, where was his evidence? He had none, at least none that would stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny. But it just had to be true because he wanted it to be. This is why it's such a waste of time talking to the religious. They are not remotely concerned with reality. They just really want to believe. We would never put up with this in most other aspects of life. But I don't want gravity to exist. So what? Too bad. It does. Grow up. But, of course, feel free to jump off the next tall building you come across if you want to test it, because you'll be doing humanity a favor by removing yourself from the gene pool. Maybe once you've plummeted to your death, you will have increased the average IQ of the human species by just a little bit. And we all know it needs it.
No God, no afterlife, no divine plan. How sad is that?
Who cares? Because the facts don't care about your feelings. That's probably about the only intelligent thing that Ben Shapiro ever said in his life. We are after two entirely different things. One is rational, and one is not. If you only care about your childish fifis, then you are doing intelligence wrong. Nobody cares what you wish was true. We care only what is actually true, and we care about the evidence that shows that it is true, at least to the best of our ability to discover it. The religious, they couldn't care less about any of that, and that's the problem. They just want to believe. It's why I really want to find a theist, anywhere, any religion, I don't really care, who actually cares about the truth. Leave your faith and your feelings at home. Just come with evidence that you can back up your beliefs with that shows that your God is actually real. Because none of them can do that. None of them even try. Why? Because none of them give a damn about the real world.
This belief is becoming more popular, even though it's not exactly cheerful. In some places, saying you're an atheist is more common now. But that's not even the most shocking part.
It's not shocking at all. People are much better educated these days, at least in some things. People are much more skeptical these days, at least in some things. And therefore, people don't believe the old-fashioned religious bullshit that people used to believe back when they were all dumb and ignorant. At least not the people who are well-educated and rational, which doesn't tend to be the religious. The people who are neither, those are the only ones still sitting in the pews, and I think we all know the vast majority of those people are old fuddies who didn't have the benefit of a modern secular education, where they focused on facts, mostly, and not on fifis. The shocking part is that there are so many idiots like that left. Luckily, that is changing rapidly. Isn't that great?
According to Phil Zuckerman, who studies society at Pitzer College in California, there are now more atheists than ever before.
Yep, fantastic, isn't it? And if we go with the Pew figures, by 2070, atheists will outnumber Christians in the US by a pretty healthy margin. Your time is coming to an end. Religion will probably never die off entirely, but it is in serious decline, and I honestly don't think it's going to take until 2070 for the inevitable fall to come. Now, I am still personally shocked at how fast religion has fallen. Back in, maybe 2000, something around there, I figured it would still take a couple of generations before religiosity would be in a serious decline. That has not happened. Religiosity is in a tailspin, and in many countries across the world, religion is already in the minority. We've talked about that in some depth before, so I don't want to go into it again, but I honestly think that within the next generation, maybe a generation and a half, which is somewhere around 2045, 2050, something like that, religion is barely going to be a thing. I just hope that some of the other irrational stupidity that's going around out there, that isn't going to take its place, but you never really know. But at least for the moment, I think signs are relatively hopeful. Well, if you're an atheist. If you're religious, you're in full panic mode. And you should be, because you're losing.
A survey across 57 countries found that between 2005 and 2011, the number of people saying they're religious went down from 77 to 68%.
It's lower than that now, sometimes far lower. Of course, we've examined those numbers in detail in the past, so I'm not going to waste everybody's time doing it again. But in a lot of countries in Europe, theists are already in the minority. In the US, officially, we're at 64%, but that number is out of date by a couple of years now. And in figures I've seen more recently, I think they suggest we're closer to 55%, but I guess that's still up for debate. In the end, though, religion is dying in the Western world and probably everywhere else as well. The problem is that in a lot of countries where religion, particularly militant religion, still exists, people can't necessarily give their true position for fear of retribution or even death. Even if it's supposedly anonymous, I wouldn't be an atheist in a heavily Muslim majority country saying that I don't believe in Allah, just in case somebody finds out and I get my ass murdered by the religious majority. That's really the problem with a lot of these polls, and as I've said before, you can't really trust polls for anything because most of them tend to be pretty biased. We've looked at a lot of them, and they don't really stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny. We have to assume that people are being honest, but for all we know, Religion is already in the minority in the US, but people are afraid to be honest about it and say, yes, I'm really an atheist, because atheism has some pretty negative connotations in a majority religious society. So you can't trust them to be necessarily honest either. Unfortunately, there are still some social benefits in pretending to believe, and until those go away, we'll never really know for sure.
On the other hand, those calling themselves atheists went up by 3, making up about 13% of the world's population.
Again, depending on whether or not those people feel comfortable being honest about their religious beliefs. Plus, this is only counting people who specifically call themselves atheists. Atheism is just the lack of belief in gods, so anyone who doesn't actively believe in any gods is in fact an atheist. Agnostics who don't believe in gods, those are all atheists too, whether they use the word or not. That's what I pointed out earlier. It's not the word that's important, it's the actual position. The number of actual atheists, the ones who do not believe in any gods, is much, much higher. And in fact, if you're calling 68% of the world's population theists, which I think is how I've seen it put before, then by definition, 32% have to be atheists because it's a binary proposition. You either believe or you don't. And if you don't actively believe, then you don't. Therefore, you're an atheist. It's really not that hard.
This percentage has only increased since then. When someone says, there is no proof that God exists, or Christianity is just stories, you should have a response.
Yes, you should. You should be able to present evidence, testable, verifiable, objective evidence that shows that your God or gods actually exist. That's the rational thing to do. It's also the thing that the religious can never ever do. As far as I'm concerned, if you can't do that, if you don't have some demonstrable evidence for the things that you assert are real, then you have no business believing it either. Of course, I can't stop people from believing whatever cockamamie nonsense they want, and I don't even try. I just think it's stupid. I had a conversation a couple of days ago with an atheist who was trying to forcibly change the mind of another atheist who he said had converted for bad reasons. First off, who cares? Yes, in an ideal world, everybody would have good reasons for what they do, but so what? It's none of your damn business what that person does, unless they ask you specifically to help them work out the kinks in their epistemology. Apparently that wasn't the case here. You don't just get to run around and insist other people change their minds. You don't just get to run around and insist everybody uses the words that you like. That makes you an asshole, especially if you're doing it without their stated consent. Don't be an asshole. Enough said.
One way to answer is with the first method, which is called the cosmological argument for God.
Bullshit. It's a dumb argument, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Now, I'm going to do it when he starts talking about it again, because that makes a little more sense, but this goes for every single religious philosophical argument ever, because they all suffer from the exact same inherent problem. Every single one of them is a giant argument from ignorance fallacy. If your only proof, since this is supposed to be about proving God to atheists, is logically fallacious, then you shouldn't be using it, should you? Then again, if they didn't, they'd have absolutely nothing to say. Nothing intelligent anyhow, which is why these interactions with the religious go so poorly. Anyhow, get on with your explanation, so I can show why it's so utterly pointless.
It goes like this. First, everything that begins has a cause.
That's actually the kalam. The original cosmological argument omitted the "that begins" bit, and then switched to it because it became obvious that people could just ask what caused God, and the religious didn't like that. There are a lot of quibbles that we can have here, after all, because they don't actually know what they claim to know, but for the sake of argument, let's just give it to them because why the heck not? We're nice. Everything that demonstrably begins has a cause. But that doesn't mean that said cause is intelligent, that it's a thinking agent, that it worked with intentionality, or that it still exists. You have to point that out to the religious who are just assuming that said cause automatically is their imaginary friend, along with all the unsupported characteristics and wishful thinking that goes along with it. You can't just assert God. You have to be able to prove God. You have to have evidence that God is actually real and in fact was responsible for whatever the heck you're claiming he was responsible for. If you can't do that, you're wasting everybody's time. But, okay, let's just continue.
Second, the universe had a beginning.
That's, debatable. Yes, our particular instantiation of space-time seems to, but we know that the Big Bang started from a state of intense heat and density, i.e., not nothing. So, did the universe have a beginning, or did it just change forms? We don't really know, because this is where the argument really goes wrong one of many, many places. It assumes that things began. They don't. They are just a rearrangement of already existing material. I didn't begin when I was born. What you identify as me began, I guess, but everything that I am came out of stuff that was around before I was. My atoms, at least some of them, came from the death of supermassive stars. We are star stuff after all. The Earth didn't begin. It came about through gravitational forces in the aftermath of the formation of the sun. The sun didn't begin because it's a third-generation star. It came from other stars that lived and died long before it ever showed up. So none of this stuff actually began in the sense that the religious want to believe. It's just a constant rearrangement of existing matter, which makes the entire column totally pointless.
Third, thus, the universe must have a cause, and that cause is God.
I'm going to handle this in two passes because I really have to. First off, as I already said, even if our instantiation of space-time had a cause, you can say nothing about what that cause might have been because we know absolutely nothing about that cause. The religious just assume that it's their imaginary friend, but they've got to prove that, not just assert it. What you want to be true doesn't matter. You have to be able to demonstrate that it actually is true. You have to be able to show a direct, demonstrable causal link between your objectively verifiable cause and the thing that you think it caused. And the religious can't do that. Because you could take the exact same argument and swap out invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies in place of God, and it wouldn't change the conclusion any. Other than the religious would be really, really sad about that because they're really attached to their God. You don't just get to assert things like that. You have to be able to back it up. And if you notice, the religious aren't even trying. Now, from a purely syllogistic standpoint, this just fails to meet structural validity. The conclusion must arise directly from the premises, and for the argument to be sound, those premises must be demonstrably true, and this fails on all counts. God was never even brought up in any of the premises, thus the whole thing falls apart under the weight of its own stupidity. Big surprise there.
It's like saying even a Big Bang needs a Big Banger.
And that's just stupid to say. This is why he's making this video for other theists, not for actual atheists who would just roll their eyes and laugh just like I'm doing. It's made for dumb people who don't understand how to make logical points and back up their claims with any kind of evidence because they just really want to believe. That is not impressive at all, and if this is the best they can do, and it is, then they've lost before they even begin. Actual reality reflects that, right? And that's why religion is dying.
The idea is that something caused the universe, and that something is God.
But you can't demonstrate that. Why can't that something be magical leprechauns or alien Elvis from another dimension? This is where you have to watch out for the actual crap that the religious are trying to slip past you, because they can't think critically about their own beliefs. This is another problem that the religious have. They don't understand that you just don't get to make shit up. Well, that sounds like God to me. So what? That doesn't make it real, and it's the reality that actually matters. Reality must be demonstrable and evidentially supported, and they don't have any of that. That's why I laugh anytime someone says, well, that's God by definition. Whose definition? You don't just get to make stuff up out of whole cloth because you really like the idea. If there is a real God, and you haven't proven that there is, then you got to be able to prove that this God is like you say he is. You can't just say, well, it sounds good to me, because that's just stupid. Where did you get your information on what this real God is like, and how do I find out for myself so I can go and check your work? Don't say the Bible, because that just moves the problem back one step. How did the people who wrote the Bible know any of that? This is always going to be the question, and they have no rational answers. And until they do, they're just wasting our time. So anyway, that's all that we're going to do for the week. This is going to be a pretty long series. Judging right now, it looks like 4 videos, but I guess that can change in the future. Who knows? We'll just have to see. I had to respond pretty heavily to the first part because it was just concentrated dumb, and the more dumb, the more I have to respond, and this looks like it's going to be a doozy. So come back in a week and we'll just keep on going. I don't know why these people are such lunatics, but maybe with your help we can figure that out together. Let's try. At least it's something to do so the stupidity doesn't hurt so much, even though it really does.